Do you ever wonder how great leaders in the community make things happen? When they encounter new, unexpected challenges like a pandemic, how do they continue to successfully make an impact? Welcome to That Sounds Terrific, the podcast that connects you with these amazing people. Get insights on what they do to meet their goals, find out how you can help them in their mission, and learn their methods so you can be more successful at what you do. Welcome to That Sounds Terrific with host Nick Koziol.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of That Sounds Terrific. Joining me today is Dave Stern. He's the fractional CTO of Stern Devops Group. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here. It's terrific to have you here. And we were chatting a little bit off the air about all the different things that you do and all the technical things that you do. So I'm really excited to kind of have you on the show and kind of explain the things that you do. So why don't we kind of get started right into that and kind of talk a little bit about what DevOps does. What is a fractional CTO?
Good questions, both. So a fractional CTO is a technical leadership position that's not full-time. I mostly work or typically work with early stage companies, startups, companies that are funded, and everybody knows what a startup is, trying to get their product off the ground. Most of my clients are SaaS, which is software as a service. So if you think of something like QuickBooks Online, that's much bigger than we would work with, but it's a good example. Or even Google Calendar, right? That's a SaaS product. Using something, the calendar on a website is the product that they're selling. So what I do is I provide technical leadership as a service. Companies of that size frequently don't need to hire someone full-time with all that expense and all that overhead. They need someone to come in and be able to guide their strategic roadmap, to be able to say, here's the direction we should be going. Here's how much this will cost. Here's the technical direction or the vendors we should use. And those are things that most companies don't, just like they don't know from a legal perspective what they should be doing, or necessarily from a financial perspective. They'll bring in a CFO or a fractional legal person or something like that. I do that on a technical basis for early stage companies typically.
Oh, very cool. And do you like concentrate on a specific region in the world, or is it all over the world? I mean, in this remote and hybrid situation that we have now, it seems like you could be anywhere.
That's true. That's true. In fact, I'm based in the New York area. I'm in Brooklyn, and I've had clients that were a 30-minute train ride from me that I didn't meet until 2 years into our working together. We finally decided to have lunch after doing many, video calls. So yeah, I don't have a specific niche or region. I can work anywhere. I happen to have some clients in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is a really nice area. I like actually having to go there. But no, I can work anywhere.
Yeah, it's always good, like when you have a position that it has travel involved. Like if you get the really good travel areas to go, like nobody really
Right.
wants to go to Hoboken. So like, sorry, Hoboken. But like, you get like Denver, you get like California, like Hawaii. Hawaii is a coveted one. It's like where all the series go to like die or celebrate when they're gonna die. It's that. Brady
Yeah.
Bunch, Hawaii,
Yeah,
all
I
that stuff.
don't often have to travel for clients. I had to go to a board meeting recently for a client. So when I do, you're right. It's nice to go to a pleasant area. I agree.
Right. Especially me hailing from like the upper part of Western, New York, where we get a lot of snow. It's always nice to have the conferences or whatever in the nice warm areas.
Agreed.
But I'm sidetracking us. So how did you get into this line of work? Like what experience do you have that like got you to this point?
Another good question. And I realize I didn't answer your question about DevOps, so
Yeah.
I'll weave that into this answer. So I started as a developer many years ago in the 90s, like just a programmer, like a lot of people do, and loved the technical side of things, and worked for a company and kind of grew into a role where I was doing more and more and was very interested in technology. You typically, traditionally, and this is where the explanation of DevOps will come in, you have two sides. You have development, you have people who are writing the code, and you have what's called operations or systems or system administrators you might have heard of. And for many years, those were two separate disciplines, right? developers would write code. What they call throw it over the wall to the systems people. They'd deploy it on the servers that they had set up. And if it broke, they'd say, your code doesn't work, it's terrible. And they'd throw it back over the wall. And then the developers would say, no, your systems are terrible, it's your fault. And they'd throw it back over the wall.
Sounds like higher ed.
Sounds like a lot of places that
Yeah.
we've all worked, I imagine. So I did both of those, eventually drifted more into the operations side. At one point, I worked for a web hosting firm where I did both. I did a lot of development, and in the same day, I might be working on switchers or routers, which are the equipment that actually does like the networking of traffic around the internet. And eventually led teams. I'm skipping past a lot of years, so it's not, a boring story, but led teams, worked in what they call all levels of the stack. So a technical stack you have from the lowest level, like deploying operating systems and securing them and setting up databases, all the way up to the front end where they, do JavaScript and make the nice widgets you see on websites that do fancy things. So I've worked all across the stack, eventually drifted in the operations side. I would say now it's probably been about 10, 15 years, DevOps emerged, which was the synthesis of development and operations, where developers, and this coincided a lot with virtual machines, cloud computing. I'm sure people have heard of the cloud. So you have like Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure and Google Compute Platform, GCP. And so with cloud computing, developers couldn't just be developers when they write code. They had to learn more about where their code's running and about distributed networks and the environments they were running in. And likewise, systems people started deploying their infrastructure as code. So these days, we don't typically rack servers and fine tune them and upgrade operating systems. We do all our infrastructure in the cloud. And that is done by writing scripts, just like developers do, that define, I want this database, I want it to be this size, I want this networking, I want this private network, I want these components. And that's all defined in code. So those two disciplines have kind of blurred and merged, and that's called DevOps. So when we talk about DevOps these days, we talk mostly about infrastructure. And that was how my company started 8 years ago. I started doing consulting in this area, and then the fractional CTO grew out of that, where we build cloud infrastructure for companies. So that's automation, deployment of software, network security, data security, stuff like that. So that's the quick explanation, but I figured I'd answer your previous question with this one.
Thank you very much. And some people have gotten past this, but like I know that the cloud, right? For instance, there are some people that are still kind of worried about storing their information up in a place they can't really fathom. And I know some part of what you do has to do with like information security and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about the cloud and security and risks maybe and non-risks, things like that? Like what's the advantage to having everything on the in the cloud and not on like some dusty server somewhere in Nebraska?
Yeah. Those are that's interesting. So there's risks with anything,
Right.
obviously. Setting up your own server, you have to really know a lot about doing that, or hiring someone to do it. You have to make sure they're doing it right, and you have to worry about things like physical security. Like someone could, depending on most data centers are actually physically secured with biometrics like fingerprints or even retinal scans, and the cages are locked. Cages are like the big racks where they
Yeah.
put the servers in. But you have to worry, people, if your data is valuable enough, and data is what every bad guy is going after these days. There have been cases where people like broke in and literally took the machine. Even if you're not worried about that extreme, knowing how to set that up, knowing the network you're running on, there's a lot more work involved in setting things up, what they call on-prem or bare metal like that. And so companies and people don't, things have been abstracted to a level where they don't want to spend that time and effort. So while there are risks in the cloud, the advantages are a lot of this stuff is taken care of for you. You want a server, you literally click a button and a virtual server is available for you to put your data on. And it's secure to a degree by default. Now, of course, you have to know what you're doing, and you have to secure that even further in the cloud. And that's something we're very good at. But it's secure by default. So someone would have to be able to get your credentials to log in. They would have to be able to know where that data is. And if you put other safeguards in place, there's levels of security you can implement that make things much more secure. But to your point, people should be careful with the cloud with good reason, unless you're have someone implementing that for you that knows what they're doing and has experience
Mhm.
making sure your data is safe.
Very cool. Thanks for clearing that up. I just know that like I've had that question myself a couple times from people sort of talking about the different ways that they, secure their information. And it's good to kind of have someone that's in the area answer that question rather than me try to explain it myself in layman's terms. So, I think the other thing, that I'd love for you to kind of go a little bit deeper into is like, the type of clients you work with and the type of services that you offer, because there's quite an array from what I understand when we were talking previously.
Yeah, yeah. So my typical client is a funded SaaS, as we said, that software as a service, which
Yep.
a lot of startups are, SaaS startup that is between a certain size. Usually what I say is between seed and Series A. Those are funding rounds. So if
Hmm.
someone starts a company, they're going to try to get funding, investors. A seed round is typically in the low hundreds of thousands all the way up to maybe $1 million, like to get them started, which of course that's a lot of money, but to a VC firm or an investor or a startup, it isn't a great deal of money, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't keep a company running for a long time if you have a few employees and expenses. All the way up to Series A. Series A is usually your first institutional investment from like a venture capital firm, and that can be
Yeah.
in the millions. So those are the companies that I typically work with. And what we do is we set up their infrastructure, we set up software development processes. So a lot of companies are inefficient because they don't have a way for, say, a team of 5 developers to develop code, to push versions of it for stakeholders to review, like places they can say, hey, I just did this feature you asked me for. Here it is, take a look at it, make sure it's right. To have a process for that code to go out, for the code to be analyzed by software to make sure it hasn't got vulnerabilities. Um, to plan and estimate, and this is where a lot of companies kind of go off a cliff. I've worked with companies that hadn't pushed a feature in 5 months because the software development firm they were working with kept promising things and they couldn't deliver because
Hmm.
they weren't breaking tasks down the well, they weren't estimating well, they weren't looking at the bigger picture. So I provide that kind of leadership so that things get done in an appropriate timeline and an appropriate cost. And
Hmm.
have done this long enough. I'm very good at estimating how long things should take, what kinds of resources they should take, what software we should be using, how we should build it. Some people are very much in their ivory tower and want to build this perfect, Facebook-like solution when they're a tiny little startup, and just getting the MVP, the minimum viable product, out to your users is the best thing. So we do that. And then the other side of my business is DevOps, like we talked about.
Hmm.
So we make sure that the cloud infrastructure is set up correctly. We make sure that all the data is secure. And I have clients that are, for example, in healthcare. And when they bring on new clients, their clients, these clients will say, well, they make them fill out questionnaires like, how secure is our data? If our users or our
Hmm.
patients or our people are going to have data in your system, you have to make us confident that it's secure, and there are best practices to follow. Their regulatory requirements like GDPR in Europe, or protecting PII,
Hmm.
personally identifiable information. And those are things we're very good at. So process, security, and efficiency. Cost containment is another thing. And I won't go in everything, but another example is we work with SaaS companies that, they'll show us their AWS bill and they're spending $10,000 a month. And we can very frequently cut that by 30% just by making their systems more efficient.
Right. Right. And that's important. And you kind of jogged my memory on like, I work for a university and it's attached to a medical center, right? So a lot of what
Mhm.
we do, um, if we were just a university that didn't have a medical center, we probably wouldn't have as many like hoops to jump through as staff.
Right.
Sometimes I laugh because like I was emailing somebody who had an email on the medical side, and the email wasn't getting through. It was getting caught by its own firewall, and we're in the same company, the same place. So it's interesting that you talked a little bit about like information security, and then like when people are like looking, is our data safe with you? In a lot of ways, that's like our data, I think, is a little bit safer than other universities because of the fact there's a hospital attached to it, and there's all this like, even when I do, honestly, I'm going to the weeds again, but even when I do expense reports, I always have to put on that there is no privatized information in here, there is no patient confidentiality,
Right.
so that people like know that it has no connection to an outside patient or research subject or whatever. So,
Yep.
but yeah, that's super interesting. So, all right. So can you kind of tell us a little bit, maybe about like a specific story or client story that you're proud of, something that was super um successful that you were able to implement?
Oh, wow. Uh, yeah, I suppose. Well, they're not going to be, they're not going to be as sexy as I would hope they could be. It's I didn't like, swoop in and stay. We have swooped in and saved the day, but in a very boring way. I've had clients, and I never want to disparage anybody, but I've had clients, and I won't speak specifically.
Yeah,
I've had
no.
clients I've worked with that had their system set up by teams that were relatively amateurish. So they were set up in ways that where they didn't consider scale, like this company was going to grow.
Mm,
They didn't consider security. They had things open. They had things in the database that weren't encrypted. They were storing. So companies will often let users upload things like, let's say, resumes or pictures. And those things have to not only be secured, but there has to be a policy to delete them, either after a period of time, or in the case of something like GDPR, if somebody in the European Union requests their data to be deleted, you have to do it.
right.
And California has similar requirements now, and a lot of states are enacting those. So we and this company that I mentioned that hadn't deployed a feature in 5 months, they were literally dying. They were being choked off. Their users needed features. Their investors were begging for stuff, and they were pleading with the company, just give us something, and they couldn't. And we came in, and within a matter of, I think, 3 weeks, we started deploying features, and we had their deployment pipeline working. And eventually, they fired that company, and we brought in. I have companies I partner with that have development teams, and we came in and we were not only able to streamline the process, but our team was cheaper than the team they were working with, and we were deploying. We could literally deploy at will, so it ended up
Mm,
being a cadence of about once a week. But if you wanted to, you could deploy every day. Meaning, we have this little feature, we have this little bug fix, we have this, we have that, and you
mhm,
can get it out. Um, Another example of that is I work with a prominent university with their geoinformatics division, and they have data that their scientists are collecting that is literally irreplaceable. Like, literally, they go out and they get this data from sources, the geologists or space or the oceans, and it's data that can never be replaced. And
mhm,
they were being told the data was being backed up, but they had no. And this is where a lot of times we come in. We're the intermediary. They were being told it was backed up. They took their word for it, but then when they would ask for a restore of a backup, they couldn't find the
yeah,
restore. And so these people whose life's work was at stake were literally losing sleep at night.
right.
So we came in, we made sure the backups were working. When they weren't working, we set up our own in the cloud, so that we could run them at will. We wrote custom software. We did look for off the shelf. We wrote custom software, and so literally they sleep better at night. And we know this irreplaceable data is
Mm,
protected. One thing that this reminds me of is an analogy that I like to use. If you take your car's knocking, and you take it to a mechanic, and you don't know anything about cars, that mechanic could tell you anything. They could say, oh, it's a loose bolt, it'll cost $200, or you need a new transmission, and that's going to cost 5,000. You don't know if you don't know cars,
right.
unless you have a trusted friend who's a mechanic who can tell you, yeah, that really is the transmission, but I can get it for you cheaper, or let this guy do it, he knows what he's doing, or no, they're totally trying to scam you. I like to think of myself as that trusted mechanic.
Mhm,
So if you're a non-technical person in your company and you rely on technology, but you have no idea if what they're telling you is accurate, cost effective, really the right way to go, actually working or not, I'm the guy who can come in and usually give that answer to somebody.
mhm. Man, how did you know I was having car trouble?
Well, I give that analogy to a lot of people, and I'm bound to be right some of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, well, geez. It's like you're in my data right now. Um, no, I think I'm really glad I asked that question because like you touched on a lot of different things that are important and one of them, that I was kind of hoping that your example would lead to is, there are a lot of these companies and startups that they don't have a lot of money. They think that, You know, they don't want to spend it on frivolous things. They want to spend it on developing whatever it is they're trying to develop, right?
Yep.
So they're afraid to spend on services like you. And it's important that they do that because like if you are getting your company ready to grow, it needs to have those processes in place in order to do that and to go to scale after that. I think another pain point is after they've become that established startup and they're that small to sort of mid-sized company, the other like level that seems to be that struggles when they go from medium to large, right? Because they're
Yes.
like, we have functioned so well as this one entity, as one large medium entity. And then when you get to that large scale, that's when things sort of need to break apart and become more divisional, and that's where those walls that you're throwing code over, like you were talking about before, become even more like, back and forth, right? So I'm really glad you were kind of talking about that, because those systems are really important to start and to put into place, and to be ready to grow to scale. So thank you for doing things like that for sure. Um, you also like you're an author. I know we talked a little bit about that, so I want to not to forget to talk about the book. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning it. I wrote a book called Hack Proof Your Startup. It's about cybersecurity for early stage companies. And I really wanted it to, I designed it to be a very actionable book where you could read it. There's a couple of chapters of introduction, but then you could read it and really hopefully implement best practices. I think some of this stuff is a black box to people or very mysterious. And I wanted to not only demystify it, but also literally in the chapters, there are action items that people can take to follow. It focuses a lot on cloud, particularly AWS, Amazon Web Services, because that's where we specialize. But really, the principles can be applied anywhere. And I really wrote it because I ended up having this conversation with a lot of people in a lot of companies, and I felt like whether this sounds a little bit cliche, but whether the book did well or not, it was important for me to get the information out there. And a little bit of self-serving when I come work with a team and they start asking, why are we doing this? I can just say, read chapter 4, you know? But really I wrote it as I didn't feel like there were many books out there that were accessible. A lot of these books are very kind of very technical or for bigger companies to follow like higher level principles. So I wanted it to be practical advice that startups at any level of technical expertise could follow.
Yeah, yeah, and having something like a resource, which I haven't read your book yet, but it sounds like it's more to the point where it gets way too deep in the weeds. Startups don't have time for that. Entrepreneurs are, you know, they're already a lot of them are already distracted very easily. They don't have time to read an entire book, and to have something like that that's kind of a cool tool to be able to kind of go through and refer to specific chapters and stuff. So that's awesome. So Dave, like, what's what's next for you? Like, you've got so much so much it sounds like you're doing. Like, where do we go from here?
Um, I don't have anything big on the horizon other than to keep doing what I'm doing. I love doing this. I love advising companies. I love building um, technical teams and technical I don't want to use the word infrastructure because I don't want it to be conflated with cloud infrastructure, but
Mhm,
I love building the process within a company and advising and helping companies save money. We often come in and we will save more than we cost, at least for
mhm,
a period of time, because it's very easy to come in and kind of cut the fat right away because people just don't know where they're spending money. And we come in when I work with a company, I'm very non-judgmental. We just come in and see where are you at and how do we get you to a more efficient place. So I want to emphasize that, and this is true of my book as well. I really try to emphasize the business elements of what I do. I'm not an ivory tower technical guy who's like, this is the right way to do it.
mhm,
I'm always thinking in terms of what's the right way to do it given your business constraints. You have
mhm,
this amount of runway, you have these fiduciary requirements, you have political or internal limitations because of co-founder relationships. That's fine. We'll work with that. And I get it's all about making money and saving money. So to answer your question more succinctly, I love what I do. I love to come in and I'm happy to have a conversation. Anybody watching this who thinks they might need our assistance, I'm happy to just have a conversation. I just like building stuff and helping people grow their companies through
mhm.
my expertise, the technical side.
Yeah, that's really cool. And Honestly, like, again, thinking about the entrepreneurial mindset, right? And the people that are doing these startups, like, they don't have all the answers. A lot of them are, the code guy. A lot of them are maybe the public speaker. They don't have all the skill sets. And I know that a lot of the advisors and consultants to these groups often say surround yourself with the people that will strengthen your weaknesses. Do the things that you're not comfortable doing or able to do. And it sounds like this service that you have is one of those great tools for entrepreneurs and startups to utilize, right?
I would like to believe so, of course. And we have a track record of doing that with clients. So the answer is yes. I do have a list of people who would agree that we've done that for them. And the other thing, when you say that, the other thing that I just want to emphasize is a lot of companies that we work with already have technical leadership. They have a
Mhm.
tech lead who may be their best developer, who's kind of elevated, or they have someone managing the team who's got some technical expertise. I never want to come in and step on that person's toes. If
Oh yeah.
anything, what I want to do is come in and empower that person to be better. So I'm always looking to partner those people. Sometimes you get personalities and they feel a little threatened, and I've dealt with that. That's fine.
Yeah.
But I'm not coming in looking to replace anybody. I want to enhance
Mhm.
and empower, so those people can be even better in what they do.
No, that's a good point too, and I guess maybe I was leading it that way, but I kind of meant it's just a tool, another tool in their toolbox, another. You're
Absolutely.
you're you're like you start. What do they say? Surround yourself with a personal board, right? So
Hmm.
you're
Hmm.
you're kind of a board member there that kind of help, and then also that lead data person or the lead tech officer or whatever can concentrate on things that they want to concentrate on and not have to worry about the processes and stuff as much, right?
Right, right. And we've worked with a lot of people who realize their own weaknesses. We all have weak. I do, I have partners that I work with when I hit an area that I don't know something about. I'll be very honest with my clients. Hey, this is an area of my expertise. Like, for example, AI. I'm not an AI
Right.
expert, but I work with some very strong AI partners. And let me bring in my partner who I trust. And of course, they trust me. By extension, they can trust that person. So the people that we're empowering and working with, a lot of times they see their own weaknesses and they'll say, hey, help me get better, show me how to do this, and I'm happy to
Mhm.
jump in and get hands dirty. And also, that's the other thing, there's a lot of what they call no code CTOs these days. I have
Mhm.
nothing against those people, but I very much can get in the code. I can understand what's going on. I've written in a lot code in a lot of languages. I don't write a lot of code these days, but
Mhm.
I'm happy to roll up my sleeves, get into a design meeting and figure out how exactly the API is going to work or the database design should work and whatnot. So yeah, I think I strayed a little bit in the answer to that question, but
No, it's okay. No, I think that's all these things are really important. And for again, layman terms and people like me, it's good to have experts that you can count on, right? And consultants and people like you that can come in, help with the processes, to kind of keep us going and growing, right? So I
yep.
really like the stuff that you do. I think it's really super important. And some of the people that I've pretty close relationships that have like great ideas for startups. They're also like do not want to give any control over to anyone. And I'm like, well, you're probably not going to grow that big, because
Right.
like, public speaking and marketing is not your forte. And if you're not willing to do that and give that to someone else, then you're kind of not going to get anywhere. So
Right.
yeah, it's great to have people like you. So I mean, we've talked a lot of different things in a short amount of time. Is there anything that like we're totally missing on that you definitely want our audience to know about you or your company or the things that you do?
The thing that comes to mind is kind of my public service message, which is why I wrote the book, which
Sure.
is just reminding people, there's a lot you can do for personal security, and I talk about it in my book. But I just want to remind people, first of all, secure your email. That's how, if hackers get access to your email, they can do a forgot password on, let's say, your bank account, and then
Mhm.
that goes to your email for you to reset your password. And if they have control of your email, they can get control of a lot of stuff. So make sure your email has a very good long random password, and you use two-factor auth like a six-digit code or some kind of a text message confirmation on that. Um, and use a password manager. If you know, what I always say is if you know your passwords, they're not secure. So I
Mhm.
use one password. I have no affiliation with that company, but I love the product. So I don't know any of my passwords. I use a password manager. They're all long random strings. All my two-factor auth is in there, and I feel very secure doing that. So
Mhm.
my message is just a public service announcement. I'm sure you'll have my website, the Stern
Yeah.
Devops Group, and my information in the show notes, so they can reach me if they want to. So just please protect your email and use a password manager.
No, that's great tip, and it's so funny. I kind of thought of that big billboard where, here's my social security number for like LifeLock.
Yeah,
All of a
yeah.
sudden, I feel like here's my password for my email. Just try to get in.
You won't be seeing that on any billboard from me. I guarantee you.
No, that's a really good thing. We shouldn't. But just like you said, yeah, all of your contact information about you, your book, your company, all that stuff will be in the show notes. Thanks for being on the show, Dave. I really do appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. I enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of That Sounds Terrific. Don't forget to check out the show notes and our website at thatsoundsterrific.com to find the contact information and the best ways to volunteer with the organizations that we feature. If you know someone that is doing terrific things and think they should be featured in a future episode, be sure to email us their name, contact info, and short description of what they're doing at thatsoundsterrific@gmail.com. If you like our show, give us a 5-star rating and give us some social media love by liking our Facebook page, That Sounds Terrific. Follow us on Twitter at Sounds Terrific 2 and Instagram at Sounds Terrific. We love hearing your feedback on how to make our show sound even more terrific. Till next time.